I miss steel.
Let's go back. Back to the beginning.
Nostalgia trip.
Hi, Gary. Welcome. Howdy. Thanks for being on the show with me today. So, for today's nostalgia trip, we are going to talk about Bethesda Games, specifically a few games. But before we dive into some of your favorite Bethesda games, can you first just introduce yourself? How do you know me?
Okay, yeah. My name's Gary. I know you through my good friend Phil, who is your husband.
Who is my husband? Yes, that is correct. How long
yeah.
have you known Phil?
Oh gosh. Well, I've known him for a long time. We were friends in high school, and then we became, I think, really good friends in college. Um, so it's oh my gosh. Now you're making me feel old because now it's
Is
been
that the point of the show?
Yeah. It's been what, 4 years since we've been in college. So I don't know, maybe 10 years.
Yeah, but I thought you'd be suitable for this show. You are a man who enjoys nostalgia, and you're a man who enjoys media. And can you talk about the topic that you have selected today? Just tee it up for us.
Sure. So I guess I would summarize this as, Bethesda games. The first thing that popped into my mind when you said talk about nostalgia is a specific game called Oblivion. It's the fourth Elder Scrolls game. Just in general, these Bethesda games, Fallout, Elder Scrolls, stuff like that. They all, that's what I think of when I think nostalgia, at least from a video game perspective. And
Yeah.
I feel like there's a lot to talk about in terms of how they make me nostalgic in different ways. So
Yeah. Yeah. So I'm just going to give a little bit of an overview of Bethesda Games before we dive into the games specifically.
Cool.
So Bethesda Games began as Bethesda Softworks in 1986, around the time when many other video game companies were popping up. And then it was acquired by ZeniMax Media, owner of Alpha Dog Studios, Arcane Studios, Machine Games, a bunch of different studios who are making a lot of really big games, which was purchased by Xbox Games last year in 2021. So all of these guys kind of all fall under the same umbrella. For the first 15 years of its existence, they self-published their own titles under the name of Bethesda, and then they made their own in-house dev team, which became Bethesda Game Studios. So those are the game titles that fall under Elder Scrolls, Fallout, etc. Some of the games that we'll be talking about today. So there's games that are separate under both umbrellas, but for the sake of this conversation, it's all Bethesda to me, and probably all Bethesda to you.
Sure.
So let's start off and talk about the Elder Scrolls series a little bit. Can you tee up Elder Scrolls for me? I am not wildly familiar with Elder Scrolls, so tell me a little bit about these games.
Sure. So Elder Scrolls, it is open world RPG. I think
Yep.
one of the flagships for open world RPGs. The theme is kind of your typical. What do you call that? Why am I blanking? It's the author of Lord of the Rings. Tolkien-esque.
Sure.
Yeah, Tolkien-esque fantasy. And maybe we'll touch on that later in the episode. But it's Tolkien-esque, but they have awesome spins on their own, lore and stuff like that.
How many games are there in the series? Do you know?
So the last one that came out was Skyrim. That was in 2011, actually, and that's the fifth one. They have some spin-off games too that are weird. But...
Right. Yeah. We'll talk about spin-offs as well. That's part of what I wanted to discuss.
Sure.
For better and for worse. But so yeah, that was the gist that I got too. Right. It's a fantasy open world game, and Oblivion came out in 2006. And it's considered one of the greatest games of all time. Like you mentioned, it's a flagship game. So is Skyrim, also just considered like really solid video games. I feel like even as someone who hasn't played them, I'm still aware that they're considered very good games and are very popular.
Right.
Let's talk about Oblivion specifically. This, like I said, came out in 2006. So how old were you in 2006?
Wow. 2006, I must have been 9 years old.
Okay. Did you play the game right when it came out?
No, actually, I did not. I didn't know anything about it for, I think, a few years after.
Okay, so were you more like in high school when you started playing it?
I think so. Maybe beginning of high school, late middle school. I played Fallout 3 first, and I might have played that a little bit after that released. I think that was maybe 2007 or something.
Yep.
Um, my friend Tristan actually introduced me to Fallout,
Okay.
and that game blew my mind. It's a typical Bethesda game, and there's really nothing else like those kind of games. So when I learned that there was kind of pretty much the same exact game but in a fantasy setting.
Sure.
I mean that's kind of how their mainline games are. They're kind of just reskins of the same game, which I absolutely love. But
Right. If it ain't broke, don't fix it, right? Like let's just
Right.
keep making them in different versions, right?
Yeah. No, I was kind of late to that party, but I don't know. I would say it was, maybe this is exaggeration, but I'd say it's life changing. I love those games. So
What about it was life changing for you?
and I don't know how to put this into words exactly, but just how open those games are. I would say it was kind of just like it was a whole nother world to just live
Sure.
in. You know what
Yeah.
I mean? And especially when you're a kid and you don't have any other responsibilities, like you can spend so much time there and do all these sorts of things. So I don't know. It was unlike anything I played up to that point.
Do you like Oblivion or Skyrim more? We can talk about Skyrim as well because they kind of go hand in hand, being that they're both Elder Scrolls games. Do you have a preference between the two?
Yeah, yeah. I was actually thinking about how to answer a potential question like that. I would say I'm more nostalgic for Oblivion, the music, the world, just playing it.
Yeah,
But I would say I enjoy playing Skyrim more. If I were to pick up one of the games today, it would definitely be Skyrim.
sure.
And there's a reason for that. I mean, there's a reason that game's been ported to like a billion different systems now. It's very playable. You can just sit down and get into it.
Right. I specifically noticed that when reading about Skyrim. It's literally available on like
Yeah.
every system you could ever imagine.
I
So
I think they did a joke commercial actually where it was like they were doing a release for it on a smart fridge or something like that, or I can't remember. It was
That's
something like
incredible.
that. Yeah. So
amazing. And just to frame up Skyrim a bit more, obviously follow up to Oblivion, also in the Elder Scrolls series. Also
Yep.
won Game of the Year. It came out in 2011, so we would have been a little bit older at the time when it came out. Probably
Yeah.
middle school. You were in middle school when it came out, right?
right.
It's set 200 years after the events of Oblivion,
Mm-hmm.
but in the same universe, obviously. And I remember literally everybody played this game. Like when I was in high school,
Yeah.
I think I was a sophomore
Yeah.
in high school in 2011, and it was like literally all anybody talked about who liked video games. All they talked about was Skyrim.
I know that blew up, and that got me thinking because Oblivion is kind of like I almost think of it as like the black sheep of the Elder Scrolls game. It's like right before it blew up. The franchise blew up with Skyrim, but it has kind of that streamliningness that Skyrim had. But yeah, everyone played that. There were memes everywhere. It was a huge pop culture thing. I don't know if you've heard of like the arrow in the knee meme or whatever, but
Yes, I am
Very
familiar.
popular game.
Yes, I actually think that's a really interesting point, and I wonder if that for you plays into why it's kind of nostalgic because it came out at probably like a really pivotal time
Yeah.
when you were growing up, but it also came out at a time when like social media was really exploding.
Yeah.
Do you think that maybe played into why it became so popular because it could be
Oh, absolutely.
memeified?
Yeah, yeah, and I really think the fact that the game is so open and that, there's a lot of player freedom there that it was kind of a platform for people to just like do their own thing. You know what I mean? I don't really know how to put that into words in a good way, but
No, yeah, and I'm not nearly as much of a gamer as you are, but I do enjoy me an open world game. I think what makes it so fun is that I'm kind of a pussy and I don't always like conflict in video games, but I like when I can just like wander around
Right.
and like find stuff and discover things, and that's what's super fun in open world games is just discovering cool things. Or like GTA is super fun because you can just drive around in cars and
Absolutely.
cause crime without actually
Yeah,
following the plot
it's
if you don't
it's
want
great
to.
for
And-
people with like ADHD, like me. You know what I mean? You can just get in there and just
Right.
like walk around. Like I would spend like maybe hours just jumping around a town in Oblivion. because I had nothing going on as a
Amazing.
kid. You know, you just just spending my time there.
Oh god, I so many hours just like endlessly playing the same video game over and
Yeah.
over again because it was just, especially like over the summer when you don't have anything
Yeah.
to do, just all the time.
Exactly. Nowadays, you know, we have so much stuff going on. It's like you sit down and play a game, you're like, I need to beat this game. I need to do X, Y, Z. I can't just, you know, sit down and chill.
It's so true. So let's tee up our third game, and then we'll dive in a little bit more into the nostalgia of all this. But Fallout, the Fallout series. Can you also describe the Fallout series for the listeners as well, who maybe are not familiar?
Yeah, I mean, I could do a whole episode on that game. It's hard to describe it in a simple way, but you know, it's a post-apocalyptic game
Yep.
after some kind of nuclear fallout. Something that really makes that game cool is that it's kind of alternate reality. So
Right.
the culture of the people is like 60s America,
Mm-hmm.
and you know, there's all this. It's a long story, but it makes sense why it's that way. They actually explain it in really cool ways. And that was actually a game before Bethesda. It was made by a different game studio. I think Interplay. They made the first
I
two
think that
games
is correct.
and then a couple
Yes.
spin-offs. So they bought that.
Yep.
The first two games are great, but they're very different. But yeah, just imagine post-apocalyptic, like 60s America.
And this one I am much more familiar with than the Elder Scrolls series because my husband, who you are friends with, really likes Fallout. My husband also tends to like go through really big phases with things and get really obsessed with certain things, and Fallout was a phase that he had specifically when he
That's
was in
good.
college. And it is kind of strangely nostalgic for me too. I remember him playing it a lot when he lived in the dorm on campus, and like I would visit him on the weekends because we went to a different college, and I would come and visit him, and he would just play Fallout like the whole time. So I have a lot of memories just surrounding Fallout. And he also really likes to listen to the music, which we're going to talk about the music of these games in a little bit too. But
For sure.
that's also very nostalgic for me. You said that you discovered Fallout before Elder Scrolls. So how old were you when you were playing Fallout?
It sounds so young, but I must have been like 10 or 11 maybe, because that came out. You know, I was
Yeah.
3 plus 2007, so maybe 10 or 11. I don't know.
Were you a big gamer when you were like 10? Because I consider
yeah.
you like quite the gamer. Like
For
you
sure.
like your video games.
Yeah.
When did you first start getting into video games? Like
Oh, I was
heavy?
born into gaming. You know what I mean? I can't remember a time in my life where I wasn't playing video games. So
What system did you first have? Like what was your first game system?
the first one that I would consider mine was the Nintendo 64.
Okay.
I played a ton of Zelda. If you were to ask me like what my favorite like franchise is, it might be Zelda, just because that, you know, I was born into that.
Yeah.
And that kind of
What's
got
your favorite Zelda game? Is it Majora's Mask? Your username on Discord is Majora, so
it might be Majora's Mask. That's probably the one I played the most as a kid. That is such a
Okay.
weird game. But yeah,
It is.
I love the imagery and the themes in that game. There's a lot of cool theories about that game too. So
yes, there are. Ben's dead, right? No, same. I quite like Zelda as well, and I grew up playing it on like my cousin's video game systems because he had like Nintendo Color and stuff like that, and I really liked, or Game Boy Color, and I liked playing it on that. But what system did you play these games on?
Xbox.
'Kay.
So I played it a lot on Xbox, and that was
The
before I
original
got into
Xbox, like Xbox One.
Xbox 360. Sorry.
Okay.
I just
Okay.
call it Xbox. But yeah, Xbox 360 until I got into PC gaming, and then exclusively PC gaming. There's a huge benefit to playing those games on PC. The modding scene. I don't know if you've heard of like modding games
Sure.
and whatnot. But
Can you describe that for listeners who are maybe not familiar with modding?
yeah, it's just, you know, users making custom content for games. It
Yep.
blew up with Skyrim, so people might have seen memes of like Thomas the Tank Engine in Skyrim replacing the dragons or whatever. I don't know if you've seen that.
Yeah.
But that was, you know, the result of mods. That's a simple one where they just, you know, replace the model or whatever. But
Right.
yeah, when I think game mods, these games come to mind. They have a huge modding scene, so I think that's
I
a
like a
huge
good
reason.
mod.
Yeah.
I do. I mean, I play very different video games. I'm a Stardew Valley girl and like a Civ girl, but they also have really great mods for those games. So I can relate and I can understand the beauty of a mod.
Right.
I get it. So let's talk a little bit about like the nostalgia of this all.
For sure.
My first question for you is how many hours do you think that you have in these games?
Oh God. I mean, I could check how much I have on PC alone. I don't know. I would say in the X thousands. Not even joking.
Amazing.
Um,
Like per
so-
game
and
or like total?
proudly. Oh, not per game. Not per game.
Okay.
But
hundreds per
yeah,
game.
Proudly thousands of hours
That's excellent.
total in the franchise.
Amazing. Has your love for video games influenced your career path at all?
I would say it did, in a kind of an indirect way. My dream job was to be a game developer.
Mm-hmm.
You know, there's still time. Maybe I will. I don't know.
Totally.
But that got me into software development. Actually, when I was a kid,
Right.
I downloaded this thing literally called Game Maker, and you could just make little games with like drag and drop
Yeah.
stuff. And what I didn't realize what you were actually doing was kind of like coding. You do like
Sure.
brackets and like logic and stuff like that. And eventually I was actually doing
Mm-hmm.
the stuff where you're writing code. And so that, yeah, I would say absolutely. Wanting to make games got me into software development.
Yeah, that's awesome. Let's talk about the music a little bit. 'Cause
Yeah.
you mentioned earlier liking the music of these games.
Absolutely.
I think video game music in general is a little underrated because
Oh.
video games tend to have amazing music,
Yeah.
and I think that like movies tend to get a little bit more credit for having really good scores,
Mm-hmm.
but video games also have really great scores to them. So can you talk about like the style of music in these games a little bit and what you like about them?
Oh gosh, yes. Where to begin is the hard question. First thing before I forget, I don't know if you do like music intros to the podcast, but if you do, maybe we could do like the Oblivion title screen intro or whatever to kind of get into this.
I'll throw it
Okay.
in here. Cue it.
I guess the style of the music is kind of just the I don't know, orchestral. If we're talking about Elder Scrolls, it's your typical whatever.
It's like classic fantasy orchestral music, you know?
Yeah, there's a guy, I think it's Jeremy Soule. He's the one that did the music, and he's fantastic. It's just great stuff.
So I'm looking at Jeremy Soule. I don't know how to say
Oh.
his name. I'm so sorry
I hope,
if
yeah.
I say it wrong. But he's done so much stuff. Like this guy has like
Yeah.
an absolutely massive list of video games that he's done scores for. The Harry Potter video games, notably as well. I think that's a notable call out.
Sure.
Rugrats in Paris, the movie, the video game, amazing.
Why not?
This guy's done some good stuff. But yeah, it's like classical orchestral music. But I like to talk about music on the show, and other guests have picked music as their nostalgic items, and I think music is inherently very nostalgic for
Yeah.
people because of the way that it's stored in our memories, and
Right.
and I think video games are so interesting because you so passively listen to the music while you're playing, right? Like you're not putting on the album, like you can certainly, but you're not putting on this music to listen to it. It's just part of your experience of the game. And it
Yeah.
gets
Oh, I do.
No, I do too. There's some really great. I listen to the Animal Crossing music all the time.
Yeah.
I think that passive experience it helps with the nostalgia factor of it all because it's just like ingrained in your subconscious
Absolutely.
while you're playing this game, right?
Well, that was something I was thinking about. Is how like people will listen to a popular song and they're like, oh yeah, this reminds me of those summer nights when we
Yeah.
were listening. You know what I mean? And
Yeah.
it's like this soundtrack reminds me of those weekend nights where I was just playing this game the whole time. You know what I mean?
Grinding
It-
thousands
it's-
of hours out on Elder Scrolls.
No, it really does it. It brings me back to that time in my life where it was just, a lot more simple, a lot
Yeah.
less going on, a lot more carefree.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I think you're on the money with that. I think it's this music combined with, memories that you're forming playing these games,
Right.
and it's kind of just like a snapshot of what your life was like. You know what I mean?
Totally.
I don't even know, like Oblivion, I'll say it here. It's not even a particularly great like game on a technical level, but it's just like the timing was perfect, playing it as a kid.
That is a theme that keeps coming up on all of these episodes as I'm starting this podcast is like, is it nostalgic because it's good or is it good because it's nostalgic?
Yeah.
And I don't
Right.
think there's anything wrong with it being good because it's nostalgic, right? It's still important to you and you still enjoyed it at the time. So I don't think that
Yeah.
devalues the product or whatever. But I think that's so interesting because it keeps coming up over and over again. Like, do we just like it because we have nostalgia for it? But I
Yeah.
don't think that's a bad thing.
Well, and there's another thing too. I think this is something not only games do, but one of the strengths of video game music is a lot of times, there is that repetition and you're hearing that same melody over and over.
Yeah.
And a lot of times their scores will reuse them, motif or whatever the musical vocabulary is.
Yeah.
But that's something the Elder Scrolls do. They have their very iconic I don't know, melody for their main theme, and they use that in all their games. And
Yeah, and there's usually certain characters will have themes associated with
Right.
them throughout the series too, similar to how like a movie score would be. Obviously, like Darth Vader's theme or something in Star Wars comes to mind. That same thing tends to play into video games too. So totally get what you're saying.
yeah.
Let's talk about Fallout's music.
Yes.
Like I mentioned earlier, I'm familiar with Fallout's music because my husband Phil really likes to listen to it. He turns it on pretty often. Like I'm quite familiar with the sound overall. And a lot of it is real music from back in the Cold War era.
Yeah.
A lot of music revolving around fears of nuclear war, atomic bombs, but packaged in cutesy 1950s music, right?
Yeah.
It's very like Americana vibe. And I think in itself, the music is super nostalgic just for the history of our country, which plays a lot into the themes of the game.
Yeah.
What about the music is nostalgic for you?
I think so. Fallout, yes, it has two types of music. The type of music that you listen on the in-game radio is that
Right.
let's say we take Fallout 3 for example. It has this, I want to say 60s, 50s, whatever that era of
It's
music
like 50s,
is.
60s. Yeah.
They have that, and then they also have like old American, I don't know, folk tune music. I don't know,
Yep.
like you know what I mean? Just
Yep.
like I wish I knew the name,
Yeah.
or Yankee Doodle went to town, whatever it is.
Yeah, it's like that Americana
yeah.
type of music, folksy.
And
yeah.
then they also have the ambient music, which is a lot more toned down compared to Elder Scrolls. It's kind of just like musical notes and whatnot. Very nostalgic just for the ambient music too. But something that's interesting there is like I hated old music when I was a kid. Like that, I was like, that's old person music. My ears just turned off. And something that Fallout did was just give me an appreciation for that music. You know what I mean? Like I would just
Yeah,
turn on the
yeah.
radio in the game and just I was listening to it over and over, and yeah, it just gave me an appreciation for that style of music.
And I think that game is particularly cool because, there's like an in-game radio that incorporates the music, kind of like how the car radios in GTA
Yeah.
will have radio stations and stuff too, but
Right.
it's kind of an integral part of the storytelling within the game, since it's, like you said, kind of telling an alternate reality of what would happen in the US if there was an atomic bomb that went off.
Yeah.
But it's very integral to the plot while still also being kind of ambient and just kind of getting in your brain. But
Right.
I think the way that they use music in that game is really cool.
There's an interesting juxtaposition
Yeah.
where you're listening to this like classical, American music or whatever, and you're like mowing down people with a machine gun or something, or
so
even just
true.
the upbeat 60s music, yeah.
It's true. No, that is part of the kitschy fun of the game that they definitely play into. So I know that you have brothers. I've met your brothers.
Yeah.
Was playing video games a big part of like your relationship with your brothers, or were you more like, leave me alone and I want to play video games by myself?
I would say it was part of it.
Okay.
I would say just a little bit, not as much as I would have expected, I guess, being
Sure.
into games as much as I was. When I was really young, my brothers would just be the source of trauma as they would break a lot of my video games.
Sure,
When
right.
they're not digital, they're discs and whatnot. So
Right, because you were the oldest brother.
Yeah,
I
yes.
think for the audience to know,
Um,
you are the oldest of your siblings.
no, we did. We definitely played a lot of games.
Yeah. Did you play any of these games with them? They're single player
No.
games.
Yeah, they're
So-
just single player games, and they're not super into these kinds of games. We're all into kind of different, I guess, styles of games.
Yeah. So thinking back on playing these games, do you have any like specific memories that pop into your brain? Like if you fired up Oblivion or you fired up a Fallout game, would you be like, dang, I remember like that one summer night back when I was like in 9th grade? Like, does anything just come to your mind about that?
I don't know if like specific like events, you know what I mean? I remember like the gist of things.
Sure.
Me and my buddy Tristan, even though it's a single player game, we would sit there and play Fallout 3. And we would like take turns when we died or whatever. And when you're a kid, it's way more scary. We're going into these sewers with like these ghouls and whatnot. And we're just freaking out. And we always
Right.
wanted to stay in the towns where it's safe, which I miss that. I try to mod the game so that they're scary again, so I can kind of recapture that feeling that I had when I was a kid.
And I think that in a lot of ways, nostalgia is about like the broader feeling,
Right.
right? Like it's not
Yeah.
necessarily about like a specific moment. And I think what you're talking about with Tristan is like a really great example of just that feeling that you have, because it's a lot of nostalgia, I think, and I've gotten this even just a couple episodes into this. It's a lot about shared experiences, right? Like things that you have in common with other people, and I think that's what makes things matter to you, right? Is things from your past that you get to share with people that you care about. So I think that's still a nice example.
I do have one, actually. I don't know why this didn't come up immediately, but you know how people go to like midnight releases for video games and stuff like that?
Of course.
We did that for Skyrim. Me and all my buddies, we did that for Skyrim.
Amazing.
Which is like the worst game to do it with, because like it's not a multiplayer game. It's not like Halo. Where you all jump into the matches together. So we have like 5 guys in my living room with like, you know, Xboxes, TV set up, and we're playing this game all at the same time. And you're supposed to like pay attention to like the quests and what you're supposed to do and whatnot. And you know, it's like 5 different games going on at once, so we're not paying attention. And you know, all of a sudden they're like, "How did you get there? Like, what am I supposed to do with this? Like, how did you join the, you know, the Imperials? I'm supposed to join the Storm Club." You know what I mean? It was just, it was really chaotic, but it's like one of my favorite memories of all time, just because, you know.
No, that's amazing. I'm just picturing like 5 TVs in a circle and everyone just sitting there. Do you remember what store you went to get your midnight release? Was it GameStop?
Yeah, GameStop.
Of course.
Yep. And we waited in line and did that whole thing. My mom actually took a bunch of pictures, and I got the special, or I don't know if it was a pre-order bonus or a special edition, but I had the Skyrim map, and she put pictures that she printed out of us kind of on that thing, so it's kind of like this memorial thing.
Adorable. I would love to have that image to share on social media when I promote this episode, because that's amazing.
Yeah.
That's awesome. So obviously you play a lot of video games. I know that you play a lot of games with my husband and Phil's friends, and you guys are all friends together, and I think part of what makes video games really special is the community that it builds. What about the gaming community do you like so much?
That's a good question. It's hard to nail down, you know, as specific there, the gaming community.
Yeah.
I think something that comes, I don't know how to put this into words, but you know how we talk about with Skyrim, there was, you know, it blew up with pop culture, and there was a lot of memes and a lot of stories and stuff like that. And it's like that shared world that people have where they can, you know, talk about things, and it has kind of like a funny spin to it.
Yeah.
And like someone will share something like the arrow in the knee or whatever, and like people will be like, "Hey, I know that because I've heard a guard say that like a trillion times in this game, and it's super annoying." You know what I mean? So I love the shared experience about that.
Yeah, no, I agree, and I think, you know, like I said, I'm not the biggest gamer ever, but I definitely appreciate when we hang out all as friends. Like, we usually end up playing some kind of video game at some point, right? And I think just the way, like you said, that it brings people into this collective immersive experience that's really unique to video games that you don't have when it's like just watching a TV show or just listening to music together. Like, you're participating in something together that is a really deeply shared experience that I think is really cool and is what makes video games such an innovative medium, you know, versus other media. Like, obviously you could all go to a concert and share that experience together, but the fact that you can virtually participate in something that's so collective, I think, is really special about video games.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And you know, sometimes you don't think about it, but I feel like the games that, you know, we're playing now will be nostalgic for in, you know, however many years.
Oh,
you know?
Absolutely. Yeah, and who even knows what's to come in the next couple years. You know, some of the greatest games, I'm sure, are to come.
Absolutely,
We're very early in the history of video games. So, you know, I'm sure some of the games that we think are really cutting edge now we'll look at in 10 years and be like, that looked like shit. I can't believe people like that game, once we all have, you know, permanent VR headsets on our faces all the time or whatever. Permanently living in the metaverse. Who knows what we'll have in the future.
But yeah, that's something I try to remind myself about is, you know, the stuff now that I'm doing, you know, because we're always looking back like, oh, this was so much better when I was a kid and whatnot. But, you know, I feel like give it a few years and I'll be nostalgic for the stuff, you know, I'm playing now.
It's true. And I think, you know, that's an interesting point about like this podcast as a whole. Like, it's not necessarily about just looking back for the sake of like only the past is what's good and valuable, but I think the past can teach us lessons about the present and learnings for the future,
sure.
and I think that's what makes nostalgia special, is it allows you to reflect on good things, but then also realize that maybe some of them were kind of bad. Like maybe Oblivion's kind of bad, but that's
Maybe.
okay because you still enjoyed
Yeah.
it. You know?
Well, yeah. No, I'm looking forward to, you know, further episodes of this podcast. I'm wondering if you might be able to answer the question of how to recapture that feeling of nostalgia as well.
Oh, that's a
You know?
challenging question. Yeah, I feel like we'll definitely explore that in time. I do plan to do like side episodes too, specifically exploring like themes of nostalgia as well.
Sure.
You know,
Cool.
and do some deeper dives. But any final thoughts about Bethesda games? Some of your favorites? Any other games that we didn't mention that you want to give a shout out to? That are Bethesda games. I listed a couple others that I was vaguely familiar with,
Sure.
including the Parts of the Caribbean series. They produced that.
Mhm.
Wolfenstein and The Evil Within. I have
Yeah.
played The Evil Within. I'm actually familiar with that game specifically. Fun game.
Yeah, yeah, and that's how you were talking about earlier that they're split up from a publishing.
Right.
You know, when I'm
Yep.
talking about Bethesda, I talk about the game development studio. So they're.
Right.
Yeah, no,
Those are your faves. You're an Elder Scrolls and Fallout guy.
yeah.
I respect it. There's a drag racing series that they produced from 2000, 2006 that I don't know about, but good for them.
Something I will say about Elder Scrolls games, to shout out some other games, you know, there are older games than Oblivion. They have the first three, Arena,
Right.
Daggerfall, and there's Morrowind, which I love Morrowind. I've played a bunch of that. Something that I think is interesting is that those games, as you go later in the series, they get more like streamlined.
Sure.
And I feel like that kind of compares to maybe like movies nowadays. Like movies might be more watchable, you know what I mean? But maybe less
Sure,
substance
yeah.
or something like that. And I feel
Yeah.
like that's kind of affected these the Elder Scrolls series. You go to the earlier games, and you know the first game is like super hard to play. Like I have played very little of it because it's you know it's an old game,
Right,
but there's so
right.
much depth to that game. And even Morrowind, which is the third game, that one it doesn't hold your hand. It doesn't have that magical arrow telling you where to go. You just blindly follow it. You know what I mean?
Sure.
It gives you directions, like you know, go down this path and look at this mushroom and turn left at the fork, or maybe it was right. I don't know. You know what I mean? So
Right.
that's something that I find interesting is that as the games go on, they get more streamlined. And you know, I told you earlier that if I were to sit down and play a game, it would be Skyrim. So obviously they're doing something right. It just kind of makes me think like I wish they could have a mix of both, or you know, find a way to get both.
Right.
And I think it's the same way with movies nowadays. You know, a lot of them are very watchable, kind of popcorn flicks, but you know, we like a bit of substance in there
Right.
too. So
Well, they have announced Elder Scrolls 6 as well as Fallout 5.
yeah,
I don't think there's official release dates for either one of them yet, but
No.
there's more to come in the series, so I guess we'll see if perhaps it just gets too streamlined or maybe they'll make some improvements.
yeah, we'll see. It's been a long time.
Oh, I
It's
did want to
been-
ask you your thoughts on Fallout 76 as well.
Oh,
Other
yeah.
spin-off type series.
Yeah, yeah. I do
your
want to
feelings.
caveat that. So you know, and let me sidetrack here a little bit. You know how there was Cyberpunk.
Right.
You've probably heard of that. It was kind
Yes.
of a big flop.
Correct.
That came from the studio that made Witcher, which was
Yep.
a really good game.
Yep.
And then they made Cyberpunk. Now they lost a lot of goodwill. Some people think that Fallout 76 was Bethesda's Cyberpunk.
Right.
I'm pretty sure that the Bethesda Game Studios, they didn't make Fallout 76. They kind of outsourced it to a secondary team.
Ah,
It might be
okay.
called Bethesda, but I think it's a different team that they hired.
Okay.
Not to dog on those guys. They did a great job. I think it was just bad direction.
Yeah.
Because no one wanted Fallout 76. They wanted a multiplayer game they play with their friends, not like an MMO where everyone's, you know, ruining your stuff and there's no depth. But in my eyes, they haven't failed yet. Their next game is actually called Starfield. I don't know if you've heard
Yep.
of that one.
Yep.
I'm really excited for that one. That one actually was supposed to be out already, but it got delayed.
Yeah, it's supposed to come out next year now.
Yeah.
2023.
Super hyped for that. They haven't failed yet, so I'm really excited for that. If that one sucks, then you know, okay, then they've you know wronged me, but you know.
Oh, and my final question that my husband Phil wanted me to
Yeah.
ask you is, what is your favorite Fallout vault number? Do you have a vault number that is your favorite?
The number or the
Just
actual
for the
vault?
listeners, like your favorite vault. You know what I mean? Like
Mm.
each of the vaults have their own little backstory for people not familiar with the game. There's
Yeah.
like some interesting, unique backstories to all of these vaults that are Fallout
Yeah.
shelters that people
Absolutely.
lived in.
There's so much
in the
depth to
games.
these games and the lore
Yes,
that
there's
you know.
like some deep backstories that I actually quite enjoy. I like all the backstory in
Yeah.
Fallout, and there's some like crazy experiments that they ran on different vaults. So some of the vault numbers are like notorious if you have a
Yeah.
favorite vault.
This is kind of a cop out, but I gotta say, Vault 101. That's the one you start in. That's the one that I started in my Bethesda game, career.
Hmm.
So, and it's a very tame vault
Right.
compared to the other ones. A lot of them are human experiment, schemes in disguise.
Right. Right. Yeah, like they would do some of the vaults, for example, like they'd have like an all-female vault, an
Yeah,
all-male
yeah.
vault, or a vault that was like they only gave them like certain items within the vaults, right, to like mess with them and
Yeah,
stuff like
yeah.
that. Yeah.
Oh, you know what? So Vault or Vault 101 is my answer, but there is another vault. I don't know what it is. Let me Google it real quick. Vault 108, I think it is. And I have to mention this one because it's full of clones, and they're all named Gary.
Of
So
course.
as you're going through the vault, they're all shouting Gary.
That's gotta be your
Gary."
favorite, dude.
yeah, yeah. So
Obviously.
that's it's a toss up between the two.
Amazing. I'm glad I asked that question. He told me to toss that one in.
Yeah.
Well, Gary, thanks for joining me today. This was fun. I've been educated a bit more, specifically about Elder Scrolls. So thanks for chatting with me, and I'm sure I'll probably have you back on the show another time as well. Everyone's always welcome back. So hope you had fun. Thanks for joining me.
I did have fun. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for joining me on this nostalgia trip. If you liked what you heard, follow the podcast to keep tripping through time with us. And if you're feeling extra supportive, leave us a review wherever you get your podcasts. Follow us on Instagram at NostalgiaTripPod for bonus content, episode release schedules, and more. Want to hear a certain topic or have a recommendation for the pod? Email us at nostalgiatrippod@gmail.com. Until next time!